All right, everybody. Thanks to Ashley for doing such a great stream before me. And sorry about the scheduling mix-up. But here I am. So I'm going to be going from 7 to 9 tonight, I think, instead of 6 to 8. Just because there was a little bit of a schedule mix-up. Totally my fault. Apologies to Ashley for interrupting her, but she was very cool about it. So we're going to talk. I'm going to continue working on my model of the honeybee, Apis mellifera, honeybee worker, and talking about detailing and some of the challenges of doing some of this stuff. So here are my references. So these images that you see right here, these are actually from me taking pictures of a dead bee through my microscope. And what I wanted to work on the thorax a bit. That's this area right here. Big challenge of the thorax is it's super, super fuzzy and furry, so it's really hard to see any detail. So I might switch between that and the abdomen and the legs. The legs are a bit easier because you can see cool detail and all that kind of stuff. These are the hind legs. But if you look around carefully and you look at enough diagrams, you can kind of see through some of the fuzz on the thorax. For the honeybee, the thorax is really cool because it's very, very round, and I kind of like the design of it. It reminds me of like a VW beetle or something like that, even though it's a bee. Let's see here. I want to make sure I have the chat up so I can see any questions that you might have. Questions that you might have. And I'm going to turn the volume down so we're not getting All right, so I'm pretty terrible at keeping an eye on the chat, so I'll do my best while I'm working here to kind of get wrapped up into things. So let's take a look. And what I have here is the same thing I had last time, which is my model of the honeybee, and then this is the original scan data, which I got from a scientist. So this is pretty high quality data. It's like, but what I had to do is, and I mentioned this last week, is clean this up, get rid of some of the scanned fuzz on here and the dirt and the schmutz, and I'll also pose it in a symmetrical way. So that took a fair amount of time. So at the stage I'm at now is before I actually do that much detailing, I just have kind of my my cleaned up surfaces to work with. And I believe I've done some, quick retopology using ZBrush. This part right here, actually this is the first thing we can do. This part right here should be separate. This is kind of like a little shield that goes over the muscles that enter the thorax for the wings. So one thing I can do is separate this out, make it a different piece. So that'd probably be a good place to start. And then I could do some more detailing. I apologize for the sniffles too. Okay, so this is why, I don't get hung up on topology until I'm really close to getting the model complete. Of course, it also helps to not lose your pen or your camera. I found the pen, found the camera. We just had a minor earthquake there, but we're okay. Here's the pen. Okay, so, when I'm doing this kind of sculpting, sometimes, I'll do a lot of stuff using sort of Dynamesh, and then I'll get to a certain point where I'll ZBrush, but I'll just do it really quickly just to get something where I can add some subdivision so it's easier to work with. But, so this is what the ZBrush version looks like. It's not bad. Later on, once I get everything sort of finalized and looking good, I might do like, if I'm going to do this for like a game engine, I might do a complete retopology either by hand or a combination of by hand and ZBrush. And if I'm doing this for print, then I'll probably go a completely different route. A lot of times I'll make a model and try and use it for both 3D printing and like, animation. So what I can do is, let's chop this off, and lots of different ways you can go about doing this. I'm just going to quickly paint a mask. Let's make sure I have symmetry on. over this and make it a different polygroup and then just separate it out that way. So that's a nice, easy way to go. And the other thing that's tough with working with scan data is, like, you know, it's great because on the one hand you get 3D structures that are very difficult to pick up when you're using a photograph or an illustration, or even when you're looking through a microscope, because even if you have something you're looking through a microscope, it's kind of hard to tell what's what, especially if it's all dead and shriveled up and all that kind of stuff. So, like, this kind of thing right here is a difficult kind of piece of anatomy to figure out that's really there, or is that some kind of scan artifact. For right now, I'm going to leave it the way it is, and I'm going to press Control W. So we'll make a polygroup out of that, and then we could just do a quick, I'm going to delete higher levels of subdivision, but before I do that, let's do this real quick. Go to the highest subdivision level, store our undo history so we can project back onto the redone model. So I'll go down to subdivision level 1. I could do actually, well, let's just do that. I'm going to delete higher and do a group split. I could also do split hidden, which preserves subdivision levels, but I'm going to close the hole anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So let's do this, and then what I'm left with is in my Thorax folder. I've got too many folders. Thorax Retopo is the folder. Here's this model, and here's this mesh. So if I take a look at my reference, we can see, let's see if we can find a good image of what I'm doing here. It's this little piece right here. You guys got to get used to looking at dead bugs whenever you're going to watch my stream. Dead bugs are a big part of it. Sometimes you can see it right there. Okay, that's good enough. Yeah, the ones. There we go. That's pretty clear right there. Okay. So now I have this guy. This is the former Thorax. And we can do, let's get rid of this little splotch right here. I'm just going to do quick auto groups. And then Control Shift click on this. And I'll do geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. And then I can do like a quick close holes. And I'm going to just smooth this real quick. I think that this has lost its symmetry a little bit, possibly. So maybe just do a quick mirror and weld. And that's obviously we're on the wrong axis. And I probably had this on a stupid axis, but let's see if I'm going to transform. Let's see. Oh, I think I have it on the y-axis. Yeah, I have it on the y-axis for whatever reason. I need to fix that, but I'm going to worry about that a bit. Let's turn this back on. Symmetry, y-axis. There we go. And I'll just do a quick ZBrush. We can do it like half is fine. That's probably a little lower than I need. Let's smooth this out a little bit. I don't like this, so I'm going to smooth this real quick. And let's do ZBrush at same. There we go, get rid of that. And let's subdivide a few times. And just do a quick project from history. So subtool way down here. And yeah, I don't have my custom interface because I just updated this version of history. ZBrush, and I need to go back and export my last version of my interface. So I'm just going to smooth this out here. This is going to be the hole where the wings come out from. Actually, let's do this. Subdivide a couple times. I'm going to mask over this part real quick and do another project history. Thanks, guys. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining me on this Wednesday evening. Oh, I hit project all instead of project history, so that means I have to drink. And undo, and let's do project history. That's better. A little drinking game, right? Okay. So I got that. Okay for now. Let's go back to a thorax retopo, and I forget the name of this part. I don't know if I actually ever knew it. And I'm just going to call it a little shield here. Let's see, this is a little bit ugly right here in terms of the topology, so let's smooth that out. Well, actually, what I'm going to do is let's do a quick close holes and a quick Dynamesh and a quick inflate here. Another Dynamesh, and then a quick ZBrush. Make sure that we have, yes, we have that. Okay, get this kind of low. To get it below 1,000 is probably good for this part. Let's subdivide it up. And I'm going to go over to V2 here so I can just turn the visibility of these guys off. I keep forgetting about this feature. It's such an awesome feature that allows you to store different visibility presets. If I need to see everything, I can go back to V1. If I just want to see the thorax, I'm going to V2, and then I can set up other presets. That's another, the thing about ZBrush is the new features come so fast and furious that I'm always trying to play catch up and trying to remember what is in the newest version. So I was watching the yearly recap today with Louis and Paul and Ian. It was a great video. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But there's so many things in there that I just learned about a few weeks ago when I was in the beta, and I'm still like, oh man, I forgot that existed. So a lot of really cool stuff that can make workflows easier. And then, there's some stuff I'm just getting used to using, like the anchor brushes, I think are really cool. And the morph history, which I think is amazing because I've always been a huge fan of morph targets, but that seems to be even cooler now and easier to use. What am I looking for? I'm looking for... Do I have my custom brushes in here? Yes. I'm going to use my SK cloth brush. SK stands for Suguri. I can never remember his name, or can't spell his name. Let me bring it up real quick. He's actually one of our ZBrush streamers, and I always promote his stuff because he's great. He has a great Gumroad site. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay. This right here, his SK pack has brushes. I absolutely love these brushes. Can't live without them. My favorite brushes in the world. So if you get a chance, go check out his site, download his brushes, send him a little donation or whatever. So anytime I'm using a brush that says SK in front of it, it's from one of these packs. But the one that I really like is this SK cloth brush. Now it's not a dynamic brush, not a dynamic cloth brush. It's older than that, but it's great for creating cloth folds, and that's why it's called that. So I use it kind of like I used to use the Damien Standard brush, which I also use as well. But unlike the Damien Standard brush, it doesn't have a pinching to it. It has just a very gentle and graceful way of creating lines on the surface. So I use it to start to define the forms, to get rid of some of that smushy, gushy kind of marshmallow look, and get something that looks a little bit more natural on hard surface, right? So I'm just kind of going in here and just kind of defining the edge like this, and then I might go over here. Another brush that I like to use is one of Tomas Wittelsbach's brushes. It's a variation essentially on the clay tubes brush. So you could use a clay tubes just with a very low Z intensity, and just going in here and kind of using it almost like sandpaper to kind of define the form. So I go back and forth between this and smooth a lot to kind of just come up to that line and kind of brush it like this and kind of defines a nice form here. And, you know, I like the little wobbles that it leaves in the surface because it kind of creates a more organic kind of, you know, I always think of detail as layers of detail. So I'm creating like a subsurface detail, not so subsurface scattering, but just a little bit of organic unevenness at the very surface, so that as I start to detail on top of this, it doesn't, you know, I'm not trying to create something that's hard surface, like perfect sports car surface. I'm trying to create something that looks very organic. And so I like the way that it does this. Like I say, I also kind of use it like sandpaper, so I'll hold the Alt key. The trick is to use it with a very low Z intensity. Take a quick look here in the chat and see how everything's going. Hello, everybody. Hello, Ahmed. Hi, Ein. Can I add a link in chat? Yes, thank you for asking. Let me make sure let me find it among my various windows. This is the ArtStation page. What I'm going to do is just choose SK Pack. Okay, here we go. There we go. Pasted the link in the chat. And he's one of the Pixelogic live streamers, so check out his live stream when he's on. Then you can ask him directly about this stuff. Okay, so looking at this briefly, and this is an image that I've taken off of the internet. So there's not a whole lot of super detail on this part. We got a little bit of lumpiness, bumpiness kind of thing going on. This part is a little bit unclear to me, so that's maybe something that's attached to the wing. The wing muscles are super difficult to sort out even when you have scan data, so it's something that I would say, for me, is a perpetual work in progress. But I'm just going to go in here real quick, and let's say I'll take the good old Damon standard brush, and I'm going to set this to spray and reduce the scale variation and increase the placement, and just maybe go real kind of lightly like this, just to create kind of a mottled appearance, and maybe smooth it out a little bit just so it looks a little bit more natural. Oops, sorry, that's my speaker freaking out. I have old cheap speakers, and every once in a while when I hit a hotkey in ZBrush, it starts bleeping like a ColecoVision. And if you're old enough to know what a ColecoVision is, well, God love you. It's a little bit strong. I don't like that. So I'm going to go back in time. Control click there to store a history point. And then I'll go in here to stroke and use adjust last. It's another wonderful feature. So I like this more than I like 3D layers. 3D layers I'm not crazy about because they just make it complicated for me when I'm sculpting. I just like to think about what I'm sculpting at the moment, and I always forget to switch layers. And that's just a personal style. Okay, so let's take a look at this. And this is such a beautiful shape. This is where the legs are coming out. If you quick go to V1, you can see. Let me turn off the scan data. So you can see where the legs are coming out of the bottom. So here's the thorax, and we can see where the wings. So this is a piece. This is actually might be the same piece right here. Maybe I meant to do that, and I had it still attached to the thorax. So I might have separated it already. Regardless, doesn't really matter. But we can see this is where it's coming out for the wings. For the wings, I haven't done that much on the wings yet, but I'll generally create separate geometry for the veins here. But let's play with the thorax a little bit first. And I'm going to go in here and just start to, I'm going to use SK cloth to come in here and just define this a little bit more. What are we at? 540,000. Let's go to 2.8 million. So I'm just kind of exaggerating some of this detail and finding the forms. The tough part about doing this, of course, is I do want to try and be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to try and resist the temptation to create too much detail, you know, or make up stuff. It's a very difficult thing, especially if you've done any kind of creature design. It's hard to resist it because it's so much fun, and you start to see things that are really cool in the form. But I always want to kind of double check, make sure I don't go down a road too much. Bring up the Z intensity here a little bit. The funny thing about ZBrush is, like I said, whenever they come out with a new version, there's always some crazy feature that you think is new, but actually goes back to ancient times of ZBrush, the days of ZBrush 2.5. And I was watching Paul demonstrate this today on the 2023 recap, where you can drop an object and then use the good old 2.5D brushes to actually add details and then pick it up. It's kind of like the new version of Projection Master, for those of you who remember Projection Master. I haven't tried it, but it's really cool. But it's very funny because I spent so much time telling students to ignore the 2.5D brushes and never pay attention to them again, and they're just there to confuse and horrify you, and now of course they make them useful again, so I have to go back and eat those words. So thanks a lot for that. But it's pretty cool stuff, because there are some cool 2.5D brushes. It's just ever since we left Projection Master, which was the old way we used to detail, haven't really used them that much, but they're still there, and I guess they're useful again. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch today's 2023 recap video. Paul does a cool demonstration on it. For hard surface buffs, it's a cool one for sure. But if I save this real quick, let's try it just to see what happens for fun. So I'm just choose Save Next, and really quickly, I have a dog who is not complying. Okay, so save that. Let me see. What we're going to do is all right, I'm going to come back to that because I don't even remember how he did it. Okay, so let's go in here and the thing about doing something like trying to create an accurate model, anatomically speaking, especially if something that's very small and hard to see, that you don't see normally through either, unless you're looking through a microscope or macro photography or whatever, is that it really becomes very difficult to be absolutely certain about the anatomy that you're sculpting, because it can only be seen through microscopes or through macro, and a lot of times it takes a real expert a genuine bona fide entomologist, not a phony entomologist like me, but somebody with actual training, to actually determine what is correct and what is incorrect. And even at that point, there's like only so many people in the world who really understand this stuff. So it's a real interesting challenge to try and make things correct. A lot of times what I have to do, I have to rely on experts at a certain level. I have to find somebody, I know a bunch of entomologists and they are very helpful. Some are more helpful than others. I have gone to a few experts before. I think I was trying to really nail down the anatomy of a female Phidippus mystaceus jumping spider. I really wanted to get it absolutely 100% correct, or as correct as I could possibly get it. And so I've tracked down this spider scientist, famous for writing books on spider anatomy and everything, and got her email through various friends, because I guess she was somewhat reclusive, like a brown recluse, I guess. And when I finally got a hold of her and I asked her a question about the exact shape of the spinnerets on this jumping spider, her answer is like, have you tried a Google image search? And I gotta tell you, I was so incredibly disappointed. But you know what? That's her deal. If she didn't feel like answering the question or whatever, she thought I was some kind of weirdo. I am some kind of weirdo, but you know, I'm a well-meaning weirdo. So I kind of felt really disappointed that I got dissed so badly. I'm like, yeah, you know, I actually have thought of doing a Google image search, and I probably have done a few of those before contacting a scientist, but thanks anyways. So I kind of left it at that, and then a friend of mine helped me by taking some really good macro pictures. But, you know, I'll never know for certain if I'm actually 100% right. Like this spot right here that I'm filling in, this is where the legs join in. Even when you cut up a dead bee and look at it through a microscope, it can be kind of tough to figure out exactly what's going on. So I'm just going to do the best I can. You know, if you're relying on illustrations, of course, then you're basically building in the bias of whoever did the illustration into your own model. You know what I mean? You're taking their mistakes and adding them to your model, but again, you just do the best you can. So, you know, what's the point of doing a thoroughly accurate insect model anyways? Isn't it more fun to create creatures? Well, that's true, it is, but it's great as a study. You know, what's the point of doing an accurate human being? We've been doing that for thousands of years, and human beings haven't gotten any better. So I'll just throw some weird philosophy at you because I'm rambling. I'm just kind of defining that a little bit better. What I'm going to do is, this is probably like an artifact from before. I'm just going to kind of start to create. I know from experience from doing honeybees before, they do have kind of a grain that goes along the surface, kind of like this. So I'm going to kind of build that in here with my clay tubes brush, just sculpting it. Again, sort of like an undercurrent to kind of imply that this kind of stuff is easy to bring back at any time, so don't worry about losing it. And here we go. So I'm just going to do this real quick. And this, of course, is the area where the head comes out. I worked on the head last time. I don't think the head should be that close to the body, so that's something I'm going to have to fix. That's a little bit ridiculous, you know, and I should hope the bee is able to move its head. So I'll have to fix that eventually. It's probably just left over from the scan, but I'm going to create some space here to create some space for the head. In some insects, you'll see like a little bit of a neck guard that comes out from the thorax. I don't think that happens in bees, though. Beetles, it'll happen a lot. A good example is like a firefly. They kind of have like this weird little shield there. If you want to get into doing insect modeling, you don't know where to start, the place I would suggest is go to place like Sketchfab, and there's loads and loads of 3D scans of insects that have been uploaded there, and there's a bunch of them for free. You can get some decent ones. They're not great, but they're a good starting place to get the basic anatomy. You can grab a few of those and start just playing with them in ZBrush. And you'll find, the scans always look good when you're looking at the thumbnail, and then you downloaded it and it's just one big lump with the texture map kind of projected on. But still, it gives you a basic idea of the anatomy, and then you can go in there and start to use reference, obviously Google image search, like a famous scientist would recommend that you use. Books, and then if you can go out in the field and take pictures of the living thing, that's always good. It's good to see it alive as opposed to looking at shriveled up dead bugs. But also you can order, if it's a common insect like a beetle or something like that, you can order specimens pretty cheap online. A few bucks, you can get 5 or 6 dead versions of your chosen insect, then chop it up, look at it under a microscope. ZBrush is getting kind of sticky here. I'm just going to kind of define these forms a little bit. It's right here. I don't know what that is. Where can you find Tomas Wittelsbach's brushes? The best thing I would do is take a look at the ZBrush schedule and see when he's streaming. I think he does Monday nights. And shoot him a message. And, we have this site called ZBJW in which we teach, where Tomas teaches how to create jewelry using ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. And for our members, one of the things they get is Tomas's brushes. But if you ask him nicely, he might be willing to send a few your way. He does. Yeah, I think he does streaming on Monday nights, but if he doesn't, you can hit him up and see if you can convince him to send you some of the brushes. Let me bring up the website. This is ZBrush Jewelry Workshop, and you can contact him through this website, or also see if he is streaming. Send him a message. I don't know if we have we might have the brushes on the online store, actually. I'm not sure. But you can check it out. I think for the clay tubes, this version of clay tubes, the settings that it has is under auto masking. It already has backface mask turned on. And take a look at the samples. Take a look at, let's do clay tubes here. Okay, so here's regular clay tubes. Let's stock this real quick. And I'm kind of curious now to see if there's much of a difference. So we can go back and forth between the two of them. So here's clay tubes and TW clay tubes. If you take a look at the edit curve, you can see regular clay tubes, TW clay tubes. Very slight change to the edit curve. And then if we go down here to, let's see if there's any difference in the samples. So this is a good way to kind of analyze a brush, because most brushes are just variations on each other. So we got a slight change to the same alpha, slight change to the edit curve. We've got backface mask turning on. Let's see if there's a difference in the depth. Depth looks about the same. Clicking between the two of them. Samples, about the same. So there's really not a whole lot of obvious difference between the two brushes other than that. you can see regular clay tubes, regular clay tubes, no backface mask, TW clay tubes, backface mask, and then there's also an intensity setting, it's set to 100, and then there's a backface mask curve. I think this is just the default though. Yeah, not much difference in tablets. So really, there's not a whole lot of difference between the two brushes. It's just really clay tubes with a low Z intensity. So you can do kind of the same thing. So yeah, it's like since most custom brushes are some kind of variation on an existing brush, it's not a bad idea to analyze them. That's a good way to learn how brushes work. I don't know what all the brush settings do because there's a crazy amount. You could spend a year studying all those settings in there. Usually I just fool around with a few settings just to kind of see if I can get what I want out of a brush. So I'm doing this just to kind of add kind of a grain to it. The keyboard is sticky, so I'm getting a lot of that weird glitchiness. I like making little loops into these details here and the undercuts. And also, you know, I go kind of fast and loose. Not necessarily sloppy, but sketchy, you know what I mean? Just to make it look a bit more organic. And I'll go usually on either side of a surface, you know, like this kind of indentation right here. I see that a lot in insect details, really fine details. So I'll take clay tubes and go in here and kind of define the form a little bit more right up to that edge. And then do a lot of smoothing. The other thing that I tend to use a lot is surface noise. I did a lot of that last time in the last live stream, so I'll do some more of that today. A few things I really love about surface noise, other than the fact that it's easy to use and fast to use, is that, you know, when you apply it to a surface, the subtool will remember the settings, and even when you save the tool and open it up again later. So for example, I created surface noise for the head subtool, and I want something similar for the body, so I could just copy and paste from the head surface noise to the I keep saying body, the thorax here. Get some more of this. But before I get into that, let's take a quick look at some reference here. Just to see, I mean, like I say, it's really hard to see any real detail in the thorax. So we have this nice little ridge line, so I should add that in here. A lot of this goop is fur, you can see, but this is the kind of detail that I'm talking about before. Like, I just like that kind of, that shape language right there, the kind of stuff that I'm doing right here, where it's just kind of like, I don't know how to describe it verbally, but, you know, it's got a hard edge to it. You know, it's round, it's organic, but it also has a hardness to it that sort of implies that growth. And then you can see there's a nice division right down here as we get into the, I believe this is called the scutum or the scutellum, this little piece right here. So as this wraps around, you can see that line there, that kind of border. So let's bring that out a little bit more. right? Make it a little bit more obvious. This is the stuff that we're going to see, you know. So eventually what I like to do is if I'm going to make this as an animation model, then eventually what I'm probably going to do, or what I've done in the past, is I'll do this in Maya, and I like to use Yeti fur as my favorite fur option because I think it's the easiest to groom. I still find XGen to be buggy and kind of a pain in the butt, whereas Yeti is pretty straightforward. Now, before anybody says anything, yes, I am learning Blender, so I'll be getting into, I'm slowly migrating from Maya over to Blender. No offense to Autodesk, but I don't care. Autodesk has more money than I can even imagine, so I don't care if they're offended. So eventually I'd like to go into doing more rigging and rendering and that kind of stuff in Blender. The main things that I like about Maya, I like using Yeti, which of course is not part of Maya, and I like using Redshift, and Redshift has a version for Blender. So eventually I'll be probably going the Blender route. But regardless, you know, so when I think about making these details, you know, on the surface, what you're really thinking about is what's going to be visible through that fur, usually in terms of, you know, specular highlights and that kind of stuff. You know, as the light is shining down and we see through the fur, we're going to see that light hit on the surface, and that's where the cool detail is going to come in and make it more convincing. So you don't want a perfectly smooth surface because that's going to look dull. Well, dull as in not interesting, not dull as in not specular. Here's a good place for a little bit of amping up of the detail here. Again, this is the SK cloth brush that I'm using. Sakaki Curls brush. And, whoops. So, had that nice little ridge down in the center there. Couple steps to store that in history. Whoops. And then go to stroke. Do this. I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to do edit, delete older, undo history because it's being a little bit too difficult. So let's go back here. There we go. And stroke and just last. Dial that in. I think we could dial it a bit more actually. I might do this, and then if you can see, it kind of builds up to that. There's a slope going up to that line. So I'm going to go in here and use that clay tubes brush. To kind of build up a slope. Okay, so the thorax of some of these little beasties is more detailed than other. I think a honeybee is a bit like medium in terms of detail. If you look at some of the crazier flies, like a robber fly or something like that, their thorax is just will mess with your head and give you nightmares because it's so crazy detail and it's really difficult to understand the forms. I think the thorax is probably the hardest part, one of the hardest parts of any insect to really understand, because even though they have similar forms, even among fairly diverse species, it's still, each critter has its own peculiarities to the way the thorax looks, and it takes a while to really nail that. I wish I knew my, insect anatomy takes a while to learn, so I'm still learning it. But when you learn all the various different pieces of, it's like, think of a human skull. When you look at human skull anatomy and you learn all the names of various pieces that make up the skull, not just the main forms, but all the different plates and everything. It's similar to that. It takes a while to really get a handle on how that works. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. Let's save this real quick. Are you currently working through your workflow only on Dynamesh? No, right now this version of the model I ZBrushed, so it has subdivision levels. But I do use, I'll use Dynamesh in an earlier phase, especially when I'm trying to clean up the scan data, or if I'm creating an insect from scratch. I'll use the Dynamesh to create the primary forms and the overall proportions. But at a certain point, and this is a personal preference, you can work whatever way you like. At a certain point, I will do a ZBrush to get it to a point where I can have subdivision levels, mainly because I find it easier to work with subdivision levels, especially if I need to really smooth something out, right? If I want to go down here and really like change some detail or smooth it out, it's nice to be able to use subdivision levels to do that, if that makes sense. But again, that's kind of a personal preference. I like Dynamesh a lot, and I will use it, like I say. I use it like, I always say that for me, it's like if you're in a life drawing class and you're sitting down and you're working with a model and you're first laying down those sketchy lines to just figure out where those parts are, that's kind of how I think of Dynamesh personally. Once you get to that stage, you're just like, okay, I know where the forms are. Now I start to create the contour lines and the shading and the details. That's when I do like a ZBrush and reproject of the detail to get a version that has subdivision levels, if that makes any sense. But again, personal preference. Everybody can do it the way they want. I've seen people use the snake hook brush to pose monsters before. Totally crazy. I don't know what they're thinking. Sorry, the reference to Ashley. I thought it was really funny. She said she was using the snake hook brush to pose. I think that's awesome. Break the rules, man. There are no rules. It's an interesting point. Somebody once explained to me, I had a hard time working with learning photography until somebody told me, it's like, there really aren't that many rules. You just play with this stuff until it looks good, and then try and remember what you did. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Now that you told me that there's no rules, I can actually do this stuff. And that's kind of true. There's guidelines. It's like the pirate code, Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I wanted to demonstrate something I was talking about before. All I got to do is find my head. Okay, so let's go back to V1. Here's my head subtool. So if I go down here, here's the actual subtool. And if I go down here to Surface and choose Noise and Edit, you can see I have a custom noise on this on the head subtool, and that was saved the last time I saved the file. So I'm just going to choose Copy, and I'm going to choose OK, and I'm going to turn this off because I don't want to apply more noise to the head. I'm going to alt-click on the the thorax to switch to this one, and we'll just go back to V2 here, and hit Noise and choose Paste. It's going to paste the noise from my head into here, same settings. Now I can choose Apply to Mesh. And so we can see there is, I have a nice little surface texture noise going over the model. I like to do apply to mesh. Sometimes I'll do mask by noise. But what I want to do now is kind of vary the strength of the noise across the surface to make it look more visually interesting. So it's not just, you know, one constant sort of strength of noise over the whole surface, because that looks CG. So, you know, maybe what I'll do is I'm going to lower my Z intensity for the smooth brush. I'm holding shift for the smooth brush, lowering the Z intensity, so I can just kind of lightly brush over areas here to kind of vary the strength of the noise. And you can see how it makes it look so much more organic when you do that. And you can see how, like, remember when I was creating with the clay tubes brush, that kind of striation? See how it sort of exists there underneath? That's sort of what I mean by sort of subsurface detail. You know, you can see it there. At first it looks like I was just being sketchy for the sake of being sketchy, but in reality it's like, I think of it in terms of layers. Not 3D layers, but just sort of conceptually as layers of noise. And you can kind of see that makes it look really natural and organic. Even when I hit it with a smooth brush, it kind of brings it out there. So in these areas right here, I don't have necessarily a rhyme or reason as to where I'm smoothing, but maybe on the larger areas, the areas that might be more exposed to wear and tear. You know, insects go through hell in their very short lives, especially bees, because they have so much work to do. So they get torn up real quick. A lot of ants, sorry, I love talking about ants. In some of the more, let's say, social colonies or types of ants, like let's say a leaf cutter or something like that, or a driver ant or something like that, you know, throughout their lives, the life of a worker, they'll actually change jobs. So they'll start out maybe as, depending on the species, of course, as maybe a nurse for the larva. Eventually they'll turn into workers going out foraging. And then the oldest ants will become the soldiers that go off and fight the wars. And ant workers are sterile females, right? So that means an ant army is made up of little sterile, can't call them grandmas because they're sterile, like they're little aunties, right? Little ladies going out to fight the wars. So if we're going to remake like a Bug's Life, we have to take that into account. Make an accurate version of Ants or Bug's Life, which will never happen because nobody wants to see that except for me. So we're going to have this nice kind of detail here, but I'm going to check out on the, hello Irene, nice to see you. Do I have any social media to follow? I am on primarily on Instagram. I don't really do Facebook anymore. So Bluepatone 01 is my Instagram. And then I do have a YouTube channel. You can look up Bluepatone, also Entomology Animated. I have a website. I'll show you real quick. I also have Entomology Animated on Instagram as well. So, but this is a little website I have, which has some of my animations about insect physiology, and then some links to my YouTube videos too, if you want to check those out. But feel free to follow me on Instagram. It's usually pictures of bugs, pictures of 3D stuff I'm working on, and pictures of my dogs. And my orange tree. So here's something that I like to do at this point when I have this kind of detail, because it looks okay, but it's still looking a little bit blah. So this is where I like to use my clay polish trick. So this is a trick that I've used for years now. Kind of discovered it by accident. I showed this last time, but just as a quick review, I'll go into, let me see, where is it? Geometry. So I'm in the tool palette under geometry, clay polish. I'm going to hit it with a clay polish. So that just is an overall polish of the whole surface, right? But if you look carefully, if I switch over to the flat color, you can see there's a very faint mask here that's been left on the surface by that clay polish. on the edges, right? So I'm going to invert that mask. Let's go back to my blue material. I'm going to press Control H to hide the mask, and then I'll take something like the inflate brush, and this is a trick which I probably use way too much, but you can see why in a second. As I start to brush over the surface, you see that mask has left that kind of residual detail. So let me hold the Shift key, bring my Z intensity back up to 100. Thank you, ZBrush. And now as I smooth this, you can see how it's leaving that really cool kind of organic, crazy pitting because of the mask that's been left through all the detailing and the clay polish. And this to me is what starts to really look like insect chitinous detail. That's the stuff that gets me excited. Where you can use I'm holding the Alt key with the inflate brush to push in, and then I'm just hitting with the smooth brush. And then this is the stuff that makes it look less CG. Of course, I'm using, how many, let's see, I could probably use more polygons on this. Oh yeah, this is 2.8 million points. So usually I do this, I would subdivide it another time before doing this to get maximum detail. But this just sort of demonstrates the technique. But you can see, especially along these edges, you know, it really starts to make things look cool. You know, it's one of those things I just discovered by accident. Masking, you know, so I spent a lot of time sort of sculpting this detail, and then I'll take advantage of it using various forms of masking, whether it's cavity masking or mask by peaks and valleys or mask by smoothness, or I'll play with all of them. And especially when I poly paint, like when I did the Japanese Hornet a few weeks ago, I demonstrated how I used masking a lot to leverage the detail I've already sculpted in here for poly painting. But that's where I think it starts to look really cool. And this is a great thing for any kind of creature detailing because it ends up looking like you spend a lot more time sculpting fine detail than you actually did, which is always something that you want to make your art director think that you did more work than you actually did. That's the goal of being a CG artist, right? But yeah, it's just like really cool organic stuff. And you can go in here with the sculpting brushes and really kind of fine tune that even more if you want to. But I think it just makes it look really cool. Yeah, okay. Oops, sorry. I don't, oh yeah, somebody's asking about the social media. Like I said, check out my Instagram, BluePatone01. I don't really do Twitter or X or Threads. I spent years arguing pointlessly in politics on Facebook, and I burn out, so I don't want to do it anymore. I haven't really changed the world through any of my comments, so I'll leave it to others to waste their time on that stuff. I know some people are going to argue that Twitter is important, but I just don't see it. Don't care for it. Don't need it. I'm going to go back to ham radio and reading graffiti on bathroom walls in public bathrooms. That's my social media. Steamed hams. Okay, so just kind of lightly going over with the inflate brush while that clay polish mask is still there, and then smoothing it out just to create kind of a micro detail. That's the kind of stuff that, you know, will really look good when you have specular lights hitting it. I'm sorry, specular reflections on the surface as the light hits it through the fur. And my workflow, generally speaking, is I'll do all my modeling, or my sculpting rather, in ZBrush. I'll do poly painting to create the diffuse or base color, whatever you want to call it, albedo, whatever. I'll do that in ZBrush because I like the poly paint tools in ZBrush. And then I'll use either Substance Painter or Marmoset to bake out cavity and normal and other various types of maps, thickness maps. The other thing I'll create in ZBrush is displacement maps. I think the displacement maps in ZBrush are still really good. But that's a whole other thing. You know, obviously that requires UVs and things like that. Yeah, see how that looks to me, that looks like an insect surface. But the thorax for a honeybee, I don't think has to be as super detailed as, say, like a fly, because most of it's covered with fur. But if you can get, you know, I could probably come in here and do even more. This young lady has probably seen a few scraps, so she looks like she's gotten some damage there. This one's a bit more pristine, but if, you know, if you can zoom in and see that kind of speckling, it's even more impressive. If I can find a clear image under a microscope on the detail. Sorry, this one's dead. Yeah, it's hard to see because of the JPEG artifacts. Need to get a better microscope. This kind of detailing and stuff. The pitting. You know, every insect has their own personality to their details, you know. I'm going to take just a quick, like, 30-second break just to make sure that my dog hasn't killed anything, and I'll be back in a second. Yes, Arlen? Okay. Okay, so I think I might leave the thorax there for now, and let me see how we're doing on time. So I'm going to do for about another hour, unless somebody shows up and kicks me off. And I think what I want to do is I want to take a break from this kind of thing, and I want to talk about wings, because they're really interesting. And so what I'm going to do, let's turn off the solo button. Because the wings right now are in a very simple state. This is basically just after I've like cleaned up the scan data and just started to detail on here. And so what I'm going to do is let's go to V3 here, and I'm going to turn on my wings. Okay. So little insect facts for y'all. Let's turn off perspective. Bees and hornets and wasps and ants and sawflies are all part of the order Hymenoptera. And this is important. What that basically means is if you look at the suffix, let me bring up just to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Hymenoptera. Wikipedia. Yes, thank you. Hymenoptera right here. This is what. So this generally, for those of you who don't know, this suffix right here basically means wing, right? So Diptera is flies. And so that basically suggests two wings, right? Diptera. Diptera. So whenever you're looking at, the Latin names of various organisms, and you see that, you know that it's referring to the wings itself, right? So Hymenoptera, basically this refers to the fact that there is sort of a joining or a membrane between the wings. So what I mean by that is most insects have 4 wings, believe it or not. And they have a front wing and a back wing, or you could say forewing and a hind wing. And Hymenoptera, basically what happens is when they fly, there's this little series of tiny, tiny hooks, just like Velcro, that run along the space between these 2 wings. And so what happens is when a bee or a wasp decides to fly, they kind of sew up that space using that Velcro very quickly, in a split second, and they basically join these 2 wings into one big wing, right? And then when they're not flying, they can detach those 2 wings, because it's just like Velcro, right? And then fold their wings so they can go in the nest and all that kind of stuff. The reason this is important is because if you're out in the field and you see something that looks like a bee, it might actually be a fly, because there are a lot of flies that mimic bees. So one way to tell, look at the wings. If there's only 2 wings, then it's a bee. Then it's a fly, because flies are the order of Diptera, meaning they all have 2 wings. I hope that makes some kind of sense. The other reason this is important for creature designers is because I see this a lot, and I actually saw it in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, I'm talking about the Wasp's outfit. She has 2 pairs of wings, just like Hymenoptera, but they were flying in opposition to each other, right? So that's much more like a dragonfly wing than it would be a wasp wing. Now, you could argue, hey, it's a mechanical suit, and also people can't get that small, so whatever. But just one of those facts that you can annoy your friends with. So it's important when you're designing creatures, if you're designing them after bees or wasps or something like that, take that into account if you care about being accurate. If you don't care, then fine, you can do whatever you want. But we want to make sure that you have 2 pairs of wings, and that when it's flying, the wings are joined up so that they're moving kind of together. You notice that I threw ants into that category of Hymenoptera. You don't often think of ants as being flying, but of course the males and the queens do have wings. The virgin queens do until they mate, then they lose their wings, and now I'm really going off on a weird tangent. Anyways, okay, enough of that stuff. Let's talk about how I usually deal with wings. So what I'll do is I'll create a flat surface, and I believe this one, usually it's going to be a single-sided surface. So if I turn off double, yeah, you can see how this is a single-sided surface. So let's turn double back on. Of course, I have the underside as being, so what I might do is I'm going to store this in history. Actually, let's just do this. I'm going to delete lower subdivision levels, go up here to display properties. Let's turn off double. I'm going to flip them so that the normals are facing upwards, so the top of the wing is visible. I'll turn double back on just because I like that. And I'll bring back the subdivision levels by hitting reconstruct subdivision surfaces. Okay, I won't go any lower than that. So the lowest subdivision level, that's kind of what the topology looks like. Very, very simple, right? And as you go higher, you can see that I've kind of sculpted in the wing veins, right? So I'm going to create separate geometry for the wing veins, but just to take a quick look at my scan here, let's go back to V1 and turn on solo. So you can kind of see there's a wing veins from the scan data. That's not super informative. So let's go over to our reference. Getting the wing vein right is important if you want to be accurate, because that's something that entomologists look at. Usually for most common insects, you can find a nice picture of the wing veins. Something like this. There you can actually see the little Velcro hooks I was talking about right there. Pretty cool. So you can use this as a background image and sculpt based on that or something like that. But just as long as you get the basic idea kind of worked out for the wings. So I'm going to assume that I did this correctly, even though it's been a few months since I did this particular model. And I'm going to go in here. Let's turn on the solo button. And I'm going to go in here and just start painting my wing veins. So I'll use the paintbrush to do this. And let's get a black color. And let's turn on polypaint. So I'm going to turn on stroke. Let's get our lazy mouse a little bit higher, lazy radius. And I'm going to press O for the focal shift to bring this down a bit. And there we go. And so what I'm going to do is I like painting the wing veins based on what I've sculpted here. And then I'm going to convert this into a mask, and then I'm going to use an extraction, and that's how I'm going to create the geometry for the wing veins. So I like to create the separate geometry because especially if you're going to render it, it's going to look, I want a different shader on it than I have on my wing. I've done it both ways where I've actually just kind of used texturing to create the wing veins on a single surface just to be economical. Like if you were going to do like a game model, maybe that might be a better way to go. Create an opacity map or something like that. But if I want to create like, let's say a visual effects style model, I'll create separate geometry for the veins. And it takes a lot of practice. It took me a long time to kind of develop a technique that works. And it still is always something that could be improved. But that's just the general idea here. So this actually kind of creates a cool loop. If you really want a challenge for doing wings, nothing beats trying to do an accurate dragonfly because that's more like, super highly detailed stained glass. And the dragonfly wings are, of course, not completely flat either. They have a very three-dimensional kind of shape to them, which is really cool. I've done a few dragonfly models, so in an upcoming live stream, I'll definitely pull out the dragonfly models so we can talk about that. Also damselflies as well. Try not to confuse them. They get offended. It's kind of cool. They have dragonflies and damselflies. I'm one of those people who gets upset when I see a damselfly mislabeled as a dragonfly. But I also get upset when people call Bach classical music. Because, he's Baroque. At least Johann Sebastian was. His upstart children were all into the new music and they did the classical stuff. Gotta love the nerds, man. I have a friend who is a super, super World War II nerd. My friend Satoshi. And I remember seeing Saving Private Ryan with him. And that movie is so intense. And by the end, you're just like emotionally spent. If you see it in the theater, you're just like gripping the seats and trying to just bring yourself back to reality because it's such an emotional film. For this part right here, this part is going to be largely a blob because I'm going to kind of convert this into geometry and kind of sculpt it a little bit later. So I'm not going to worry about this because this gets complicated. But right now I'm just going to kind of have these go into here. But anyways, at the end of the movie, I remember sitting in my seat trying to recover from the last battle scene as the credits were rolling, and Sot just leaned over to me and started explaining to me why that was not the right type of plane that they would use in that particular season, in that particular theater of war during World War II, and that actual model of plane was released several months later and was largely used in the Pacific. And I'm just like, how do you notice these things? How do you pay attention to some kind of detail like that? Of course, he's also a scientist, so I'm not surprised. How is that your takeaway message from this movie? Paying attention to, which model airplane they used for that particular scene. It's hysterical. I'm going to leave this somewhat ambiguous and see if I can fix that a little bit later. That might be cause for some Dynamesh right there. Generally on this leading edge, I'm going to have a fairly thick wing vane here, but I'll leave just enough space. Let's make sure that I'm not making too much stuff up. It actually does look like, oops, we do have a rather thick spot right here. So, okay. So, again, if you're a creature designer and you do a lot of fairies and that kind of stuff, I think it would behoove you to spend some time doing some accurate insect wings, because the number one thing I see, it kind of disappoints me when I see people do fairy designs, is they kind of just, they drop the ball when it comes to the wings, which is kind of too bad, because that's, if you're not doing cool wings in a fairy, then all you're doing is just like, a pretty girl sitting in a mushroom or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but mine is, if you're going to do it right. Do some really badass wings. Study dragonfly, damselfly wings. All you have to do is spend a few days modeling an accurate dragonfly wings, and then use that for your fairies from then on, and you're good, right? But I think it's a good idea to try and do as good a job as you can, just to make it more interesting. Because you have to, these are the ways that you had to stand out as an artist. You cannot half-ass it as an artist these days. There's just too much competition. Compared to when I started doing CG way back literally in the late 90s, and I wish that was a joke, but that's actually true. The competition now is just absolutely insane. And of course, you're also competing with machines, with AI. So you cannot afford to half-ass it. Even if you use AI, you can't half-ass AI. You've got to do everything. Because the other thing that I tell my students when I'm teaching at Noman is like, you're not just competing with the people in the classroom. You're competing with everybody in the school. You're competing with all the teachers in the school, and you're competing with everybody globally, the entire frickin' world. So you got to find ways to stand out. That means spending some time making decent fairy wings, then it's time well spent. Sorry, I just turned into a sermon there, but I'm pretty sure most people will agree with me. Most people in the industry anyways. The industry is going through a massive reboot right now anyways, so we'll see what happens. But okay, so I think that looks, I'm just comparing it with my reference here, and I think that looks pretty good. It's pretty good for demonstration purposes anyways. Obviously I had to do the other wing as well. So now that I have this, right, let me just make this a little bit thicker. And my wing is what? It's 442,000, so I think that's probably good. And now I'm going to go in here down to masking. This is just the way I do it. I'm sure there are other ways to do it as well. Let's do masking. Mask by color, mask by intensity. Let's go to our subtool here. Turn off poly paint. Switch color. So now we can see our mask. There's our mask. I might do a quick, let's just boost it just a little bit for fun. Masking, boost mask. There you go. And good old extraction. I don't think I have the extraction plugin installed on this version of ZBrush. So I'm just going to use the old-fashioned extraction. It's all the way down here. Extract. Let's see, if I do a preview, that looks a bit too thick. Let's come in here, might go 0.25. That's good, I'll accept it. So there's our wing veins. I'm going to clear the mask. Of course, it's kind of lifted the topology from the wing itself. So here's a good case for doing Dynamesh. Also help close out some of this stuff. So let me go in here real quick and do an inflate on some of this. I'm just going to do inflate all over the place here because I'll sculpt this part. And Dynamesh. Let's see, 128, that's a bit low. It's a bit high, let's do something like that. Just something that's enough geometry to hold the detail, but now I can go in here and maybe do a little bit of inflate, a little bit of smoothing. I just want to get it so that there's not too much geometry weirdness. You can also use sculptress mode for this kind of thing. Something like that. Such a cool design. Okay. Do a quick ZBrush, and now I'm going to go in here and do ZBrush. I'll just do adaptive. What do we got? 19,000 here. So let's set this down to like 5 and do a ZBrush. Okay. Not bad. I'm going to inflate this a little bit so nothing disappears. So I'm going to do another ZBrush. Down even lower so I can straighten out some of these wobbles. So let's set this to half and do a ZBrush. And let's make sure that do I still have 2? Huh. I forgot to do symmetry. That's okay. So I want to get it down to the point right before it starts to distort. So I get a little hole there. So let's go in here and do, you could do this sculptress, or you could go in here and do modify topology, close holes, and I'm going to do ZBrush, but I'm going to keep it at same this time. Take a look at the wireframes. That's not too bad. So that's pretty good. Now the trick here is that I want to start to smooth this out to make it look a little bit neater. The problem is that when you start to smooth these joints here, you get this kind of thing. So this is where it's a little bit tricky, and you have to be careful. I mean, it's not a bad idea to store the history there, but I just want to I don't want this to be too wobbly, and I want to kind of create nice, graceful tapers. But that works pretty well. So this is, 5,700 points for this one. So obviously I'm going to duplicate it to the other side because it's not symmetrical. So I'm going to have about 10,000 points just for the wing veins. And you could ZBrush even more if you wanted to, try and get lower. It's still going to be kind of hefty, but I've rigged and animated wings with this kind of density before. If it's for like, sort of traditional CG animation, which I think is an oxymoron on several levels, it should be okay. If I was going to do a game model and I was really worried about points, or maybe I was going to do swarm of 1,000 bees, then obviously you probably want to think about maybe instead of using separate geometry, painting opacity maps for the wing veins and taking the route of texturing it. But I like to do, if I'm doing an animation where there's a close-up on the wing, having that separate geometry I think really helps out a lot. Let's turn that off right there. And then I'm going to go in here and let's do, whoops. Modify topology across the y-axis. Okay. Cool. Let's see. Okay. Can I explain my clay polish workflow? I do have some tutorials for it. Do I use the, okay, sorry, I'm catching up on a couple questions here. I'll show the, I'll re-demonstrate the clay polish technique again. The new surface noises, I have used them a little bit, the Maxon noises, they're really cool. The Maxon noises that are now part of ZBrush, they're taken over from Cinema 4D, but they've also been part of Redshift for a while. So I've used those Redshift nodes, Maxon noise Redshift node in Redshift for Maya. They're really cool procedural noises. I have used them a little bit here in the new ZBrush, and they're quite cool. So once this finishes auto-saving and I have a sip of beer, I'll talk a bit more about that. And I'll demonstrate all of this on the actual wing membrane, because that's the thing I want to tackle next. Now for the, actually, before I get into that, let's subdivide my wing veins. So I got my wing veins, let's get them up to almost 3 million. Because this is a good point to talk a little bit more about detailing these things and also about what I just spoke about. So we might want to go in here and choose SK cloth just to start to, I'm just going to kind of quickly do this just to demonstrate the techniques. If I'm doing this for reals, I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to sort out what's going on with the muscles here, but that's one of the probably the most challenging thing for insect modeling is getting the wing muscles right, because you're either looking off of really blurry images, really dead bugs under a microscope, or really difficult to interpret illustrations. Either way, trying to figure out how those muscles work is really tough. So I'm going to skip that and just focus on the veins here. But I'm just kind of tightening these up a little bit and just adding a little bit of detail here. Let's make sure I have the intensity up. And I might actually also go in here with the move brush and just tighten up some of these corners, just so they're not so, so they have more of a hard turn to them and less of this kind of thing, right? It's a little bit tricky because sometimes you get that kind of thing in here. I've never quite done a wing vein I'm totally happy with because of this issue, but it's okay. Let's go down a little bit. Trying to avoid that wishbone shape as well. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at surface noise again, because I do like to add a little bit of surface noise to the wing veins since it gets picked up by the light. If you take a look, there's definitely some noise here, and it's also, you can see in the colors, right? It can be subtle, but subtle is what we're going for. A little bit of wing, like this kind of stuff right here, right? A little bit of noise, a little bit of A little bit of funk. So, as was mentioned a few moments ago in the chat, we were talking about the new Maxon noise, right? So here's the standard surface noise. So if I go into noise plug, right? Right here is the new Maxon noise. This is the one that's been added. So if I click on this, it's basically a whole bunch of different procedural noises, a lot of them. You kind of have to sort of experiment with them and see how they look. Let's just pick like something like electric because it sounds cool. And we can kind of play with these settings right here. What I usually do is I'll close this, set my mix basic noise down to 0, and then start to play with the plug-in scale until we can kind of see the noise. It might be, let's do this. Yeah, I bring up the strength a little bit and then play with the scale. We can get an idea of what that particular noise looks like. And let's say maybe I don't like that. I'll go in here to edit. But now that I've established the scale and the strength, it's a little bit easier to see what happens when I change to different noises. All right, so this is electric. Here's sparse convoluted. I don't know. Wavy turbulence. It's kind of interesting. Whoops. Cell. Zata. Somebody who's having fun with these names. Blister turbulence. That's kind of cool. So you can see there's just a whole bunch of different types of noise. It's obviously easier to see on a flat surface, but let's do Luca. I'm going to choose OK and maybe play with that plug-in scale a little bit more. Yeah, that's kind of cool. And then of course you could still adjust the graph if you want to kind of fine-tune it. All right, maybe something like that. It's a little bit extreme, but that's okay. Yeah, something like that's cool. So choose OK. So then we can see, yeah, it's a really interesting noise. Quite different from what we get with kind of the typical noises. And so I might do apply to mesh. So that's going to apply it, right? And so now it's actually baked into the geometry. And now, once again, just to kind of reiterate what I was talking about with that clay polish, so I want to kind of vary the strength of the noise and make it look even more interesting. Let's just smooth out little parts here just for the sake of demonstration here, just a few things here and there. And then I'm going to go in here to Geometry, Clay Polish. I'm going to hit it with the clay polish. It's going to do an overall polish to the whole surface, right? So we lose a lot of that detail. But like I said, you can see that mask that's left behind right there. So I'm going to invert that mask, Control I. I like to hide the mask, Control H. The mask is still applied. And then I'll go over here with the inflate brush and start to do sort of inflate and then smooth, inflate and smooth, you know, just to bring out some of that noise and make it look, because that to me looks a bit more organic. Now, again, this technique, you know, if you abuse it too much, then all your detail is going to look the same. You know what I mean? It's one of these tricks that you want to use judiciously, but it's also very fast. I mean, you could do like an overall deformation smooth and then an overall, or inflate rather, and then smooth it. But I think I like to kind of vary the strength using the, by brushing over it with different pressure on the tablet. I probably forgot to turn on symmetry, and my keyboard's acting up. It's getting sticky. But yeah, you see that detail there? It's great for like zombie flesh. Like you do this on the face of somebody, it looks really cool. You just do it sparingly here and there. So hopefully that answers your question. If you wanted to see me repeat that technique. And I've done it in a few other demonstrations as well. Let's see. Yeah, surface noise is really awesome. And then, of course, the other way to use surface noise is with the noise brush. I'll demonstrate that in a second. I just want to do a couple more of these right here. Let's see, that's my 3D mouse. This I have one of these 3D mouses here, but it's being a jerk lately. So I'm going to clear the mask, Control Drag to clear the mask, and take a look at this noise brush right here. So what this is let's save real quick. Save next. I'll just demonstrate this in another surface. I'll do a quick, if you guys want to see my website, a little self-promotion here if you don't mind. So I have an ArtStation site, bluepatone.com, and you can see here's my portfolio. Guess what? It has lots of bugs on it, and that kind of stuff. So you can check out some of my critters and jewelry projects and various animations and other things. I do also on Udemy look up Keller. So I've done a lot of jewelry stuff with Thomas Wittelsbach. So I have some cool courses up here for primarily for jewelry designers, but also for beginners at ZBrush. So I have 3 courses which I think you might like. I have one which is basically ZBrush for jewelry designers. This is the fundamentals. This is basically going through all the fundamental aspects of ZBrush in terms of the interface and the tools. I did another course which is basically understanding ZBrush geometry. So what's the difference between Dynamesh and Nanomesh and Z-Remesher and all the various different types. So it's a bunch of different chapters, each devoted to a different type of geometry within ZBrush. And then I have another one which is sculpting a printable violin. So this basically is mostly about Z-Modeler, but it goes through the entire process of sculpting a violin and then making it watertight so you can actually do a 3D print of it and cast it as jewelry. So if you want to check that out, so I have a bunch of courses on udemy.com. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, there's a ZBrush Jewelry Workshop. And Thomas Wittelsbach and I both have a whole bunch of courses in there, and we have a membership and the benefits and a Discord channel, so you can check that out too. And then Tomas, I think he does Mondays, but I have to double check when he's streaming. But his streams are always good. And he does critiques as well. So you can upload your models and he'll do a critique of them. Okay, so what I wanted to do was, I'm just going to go over here to this polysphere and just talk really quickly about the noise brush. So the noise brush, I don't have surface noise or anything like that applied to it, but it just has that procedural noise baked into the brush itself. And so you can use this in combination with everything that I've already shown. And you can see just by smoothing it, you can get some cool organic stuff. That's just the default. If you go into the brush palette and under surface noise, if I go into edit, I get that pretty much the same interface that I saw before over here, but this is just on the brush. And of course, this also has, if you go to noise plug, it also has all of the Maxon noises built in. So if I choose Luca or something like that, and then and I'll choose OK, then I can start sculpting on here. Is it going to do anything? No. Let's try that one more time. Let's do plug-in scale, reduce it, and some crazy noise. Look at that. Look at that, as Mr. Gabriel might say. And you can see you can adjust this as well. Get some really gnarly noise going. But what's cool about the noise brush that makes it different from the other noise that I was using. Okay, so I've just set the noise there and sculpting on the surface. And then what you can do is if you go in here and turn on local projection mode and dynamic scale, you can actually use the scale of the brush itself in other words, brush size, to change the scale of the noise on the surface, which is really cool. So that way you can vary up the noise in very interesting ways, right? Sculpting layers of it. So again, it's the same concept. It's also a procedural noise. It's just instead of applied to the surface, it's applied to the brush as kind of like an alpha. So worth checking out if you haven't used it before. So let's go back to our beat. Now, the next thing I would do was basically go in and do the same thing for the hind wings that I did for the front wings to create the wing veins. I'd also go in here and kind of work on this a little bit more to make it look a little bit less mechanical and a little bit more natural. Oh, actually, the other thing I want to do is I want to talk about the what I'm going to do to the wing membrane. So let's see. Wing membrane is 400,000. Let's make sure there's no mask applied. I'm going to divide it again, get it up to, say, 7 million. So, and let's hide the hind wing. And take a quick look at our reference here. This is another one of my favorite parts to model, because even though the wings are transparent, you can see from our reference imagery, there's quite a bit of detail on here. There's also a certain amount of tension that you want to sculpt into the wing membrane. So these are the things that are going to show up in the specular highlights or reflections on the surface that make it really cool. So you want to have this kind of tension between the wing veins and the cells of the membrane itself. You also want to think about kind of the damage along the edge, especially in older bugs. And then, you know, another thing that I love to play with when I'm doing the shading is, of course, creating that kind of reflectivity in the kind of chromatic aberration here. I don't know if that's a proper term, that you see here on the surface. But none of that is going to show up unless you have some detail sculpted in the surface. And this is another case where that surface noise is going to come in real handy, right? So the first thing I do, again, I'm kind of thinking of layers of detail. The first thing I'm going to do is start going in here and just kind of sculpting in the cells. Maybe I'll turn on transparency here. Just to kind of create that tension and get the shape kind of under control. This is another one where I like to use clay tubes and just start to kind of even out, you know, and I'm building in that kind of underlay of noise here by sculpting with clay tubes with that square alpha, and then smoothing as well to create kind of that kind of underlying noise, or that underlying detail. Something that the other detail is going to be sitting on top of. And the other thing I want to do is make sure if I'm confused as to whether I'm looking at the top or the bottom here. So that's the bottom. Here's the top. Okay. So it doesn't really matter if I sculpt from the top or the bottom, but just to be consistent, I'm going to sculpt from the top. It does matter because this is a single-sided surface, like I mentioned before. And if you have a single-sided surface, some of the brushes are paying attention to the normal direction. So if you've ever worked on the surface and it looks like your brush is doing nothing, even though you've got the Z intensity way up or something like that, you're like, what is going on? A lot of times it's because you might have double-sided turned on for your surface and you're sculpting on a single-sided surface. So you want to double check, maybe flip it over and see if the sculpting brush is actually working on one side and not on the other. And that's how you know. So real quickly, I'm just kind of evening out this a little bit, evening it out, I should say, and then making sure that the wings are visible. I mean, the final surface is going to be transparent, so the wing veins are always going to be visible. But I still like to create kind of those slopes that go up to the wing veins, kind of like this, you know. And then this also is another, sometimes I'll go in here with the SK cloth brush and just kind of, let's bring down the Z intensity. And create some lines that just imply a certain amount of tension maybe continue some of the veins a little bit, or create this kind of thing. I mean, it is kind of like cloth in a way. I have a really wide draw size, and they'll just go down the middle of these cells here to kind of puff them up and create kind of interesting three-dimensional shape to it. The cool thing about, like, you know, as opposed to bee and fly wings, if you look at dragonfly wings, of course dragonflies are some of the oldest flying insects. They're downright ancient, right? If you look at the side, look at it from the profile, they kind of have this corrugated look to them. It's not a flat surface. So that's the other thing. If you're doing fairies, don't make your wings 100% flat, the membranes. You gotta have some three-dimensionality to them. But for dragonfly wings, that corrugated surface between the various cells of that kind of stained glass veining actually serves an important purpose, because when the dragonfly is flapping its wings, it's doing so in a way that creates tiny little vortices in that three-dimensional surface of the wing. And those little vortices of air become like little balls of air that act almost like ball bearings in a way. So dragonflies, part of the reason they're so graceful and they have such an amazing ability to like turn 180 degrees within just a few wing flaps, is because those little ball bearings, those vortices of air, it's almost like it's riding on top of them. You know what I mean? It's like rolling through the air in a weird way. It's kind of hard to visualize, but I've actually read a few papers about this, and it's one of those things that they're using in terms of taking design ideas from nature. There's a Japanese scientist, and I'm sorry I forget his name, but he's been developing wind turbines that use this principle so that they're able to basically, the air is able to push the wind turbine even at really low velocity. So maybe the wind is like 5 miles per hour or something like that, something barely even noticeable. It still manages, because of that three-dimensional shape, to turn the turbine and it, you know, generate power or whatever it's trying to do, whatever the turbine's trying to do. So it's a really cool kind of bio design or bio-inspired design. But it's also something that's like, if you're modeling a dragonfly, you make the wings perfectly flat, then you're doing a disservice to one of the coolest aspects of dragonflies. There are no aspects of dragonflies that aren't cool. They're just 100% cool all the way through. Even the name, dragonfly. I mean, come on. That's my sermon for today. Dragonfly wings. They must be appreciated. And damselfly wings. I think damselflies have the advantage that they can fold their wings up when they're resting, and dragonflies haven't figured that out yet. I'm kind of just evening this out a little bit. And yeah, something like that. It's like a grain. I'm kind of creating a grain here with that clay polish brush. And then, you know, do a quick smooth. And a lot of times with wings, wing membranes, that they actually have tiny, almost barely perceptible hairs growing off of the wing membrane. You really have to see like a real close-up to notice it. I've seen it on some bees and wasps, and I think flies as well. And that's where you kind of get that kind of like dot pattern, that dot noise pattern that you sometimes see on wings. Okay. Okay. So, did I forget to turn on symmetry? Probably. Yep, sure did. That's okay. You can always copy it over later. Yeah, there's something sticky going on in my mouse. Sometimes you go to preferences. Let's see. Tablet. Okay, so let's do a little bit of surface noise here again. And I wish the controls were exactly the same, but they aren't. This interface can get a little bit confusing. That's good enough. Okay, so I don't have to go too crazy on this. I don't want the detail to be too dense. Let's go to noise plug and take advantage of that Maxon noise again. Let's see. I'm just going to choose one here at random, and then mix basic noise and plug-in scale. Let's see if we can find the right scale here. This is Stupel Wavy Turb. Oh, I just think I killed it. I killed it. Well, it's alright. I got 5 minutes left. What are you going to do? I guess we're going to have to pick up next time. Let's see if that will actually resolve itself. Let's see. I'll wait for this to respond. Maybe it'll recover. Who knows? Well, while that's crashing, I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. I think I'm going to continue doing Wednesdays this month. I had to figure out if it's going to be 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. I had a little bit of a snafu with Ashley because I didn't realize she was doing a 4-hour stream today, so apologies to her for interrupting. But she did, I think she said that she's not coming back until January. So if that's true, then I'll do 6 o'clock on Wednesdays for the rest of this month. If she is going to come back and do some streams this month, then I'll work it out with her and update the schedule. So just check out the schedule on pixelogic.com. Send me a message or follow me on Instagram, BluePatone01, and I usually make an announcement of when I'm going to be live streaming. But thanks for joining me, and I hope you got some cool information out of this. Remember, there's lots of bugs to sculpt out there. There's 400,000 species of beetles and even more species of wasps, and that's just beetles and wasps. So got millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of bugs to sculpt. So plenty of work for all of us. I hope you enjoyed it. Or if you're a creature designer, I hope you get some ideas for your cool creatures. It never hurts to do some research. And thanks very much. And I'm just going to let ZBrush crash and hope that I remember to save it at a good point. But, you know, whatever. I wasn't totally happy with the sculpt anyways. So that's how you get better. Just let ZBrush crash and try and fix it later. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night.